Okay, that's great. So being the last day today, we have a couple of concepts to be discussed. So one is we need to discuss on the optional. This is one of the important feature that got introduced in Java 8. So let's have more detailed understanding of this optional usage and why do we need to use them. In most of the interviews, they used to ask these questions relevant to optional. So yeah, so advisably have more uh, learnings on this optional as well. That's number one. And the last thing that we are going to discuss today is date API. So there is an exclusive date API that got dedicated uh, in Java, and that's introduced in Java 8. So this is what which we'll be taking up today. So in the last Connect session, in the last week session, we had the discussions on streams. So I hope the people who have missed the Connect session, probably you would have gone through the recordings. So streams are very important. So streams internally to the streams also we have to use optional. Okay, and that I guess in one of the demo I was also briefing about it. But first we need to understand that why we need optional. So then only we can effectively use the optional into the streams. So today we are going to focus on this optional and the date API to summarize this session. And I was about to share the slides, so today I'll be doing it. So please ensure you go through those handy slides. It's 100 plus slides, as I said. It's been fine-tuned and updated as per the requirement. So I'll be sharing it in the WhatsApp group. Okay, now let's get into this optional discussion. So the moment we talk about optional, so what does this optional says is it's a general purpose usage. Okay, you can use it for any specific purpose, general purpose usage. Uh, if you have any challenge on my audio, please let me know. Okay, because I have some bad network today, so probably you can just update me if in case you have some challenge on my voice. So as I said, optional is a general purpose usage, not specific to streams. Okay, we can think of utilizing the optional because most of the methods that we might be seeing on streams, stream methods are eligible for returning optional. Okay, so but apart from that, streams can we use optional in general purpose? Yes, of course we can use it in general purpose. What this handles is this handles the null references. Okay, it's helping us in handling the null reference. So before before optional, how it was. Before optional usages, how it were we were been using the null references. Literally, we'll be checking it. Let's say, for example, you have object, right? And if the object is assigned to null, then what happens is you cannot use this object, right? If I use the object null object to do some conversion, then literally it will raise a null pointer exception, correct? Null pointer exception. So what we do in order to avoid the null pointer exception, we need to predict that and we need to arrest from not entering into a null pointer exception. So basically we need to apply if, and then we'll be saying the object is not equal to null. If it is not equal to null, then you will be able to perform this operation of object dot toString. For example, I'm saying, okay, it's not logically correct, but though the condition is set, the explicit condition is set, and this condition is helping us in protecting from not entering into the null pointer exception. If a good developer, okay, will follow the standards of not entering into the null pointer exception. At any time it might happen. So you need to predict that. Will this object by any means becomes null? But we cannot test all objects with if condition, right? We should have a checklist that during which scenario this object might enter into a null reference. So that we need to predict first, and to certain objects categorizations, we can finalize that okay, this object during this transaction, this object might become null. So how do we respond that object back to the business logic? You cannot do that. So before responding the object for the further business processing, you can avoid that object from entering into a null exception. So that's what ideally that we are going to discuss throughout this optional discussion. Okay, this optional is going to help us in eliminating this null pointer exception. It will help us in eliminating the null pointer exception. But like how we apply a condition here, the same way here also we'll be applying a condition, but it's more custom made and it's more convenient for the developer to use, and it's more elaborated rather than just saying object not equal to null. Okay, it has a different style of logic. Okay, the optional can be used for different set of logics we can think of, because it has multiple functions integrated to it. It has multiple API functions which is integrated into the optional, other than just a old age code like object not equal to null or object equal to null and then resist the null pointer exception. We can go modernized by using more API methods in order to avoid the null pointer exception. So the base theme here is optional is just helping us to handle the null pointer references very carefully. Okay, so that's what this optional is all about. And optional type will also take the generic. Okay, you can apply the generic style of code. Generic style of code. Okay, so optional generic style of code can be applied. But what is this optional? We'll see more in detail. Okay, when you get into the demo, when we get into the demo, probably you will have more understanding. But if in case you have any queries, please do let me know. So week 3, day 1 demos. Someone is waiting on the lobby. Yeah. So, so let's have optional demo 1. Finish. First, let's understand this optional, and then we'll go with some small logic of use case. So optional is coming from java.util package. Okay, you can see it's by default a generic style. Optional, generic style. Okay, any type can be a part of this optional. So optional belongs to which package? Optional belongs to java.util package, and this got used from 1.8. So what we can do with this optional? What are the different ways we can make use of this optional effectively? We'll see that. Okay. So firstly, let's get into the optional and see what it is. Okay. So the first thing that you have to notice here is this optional is available from 1.8. This is very important, right? Optional is one of the new feature that got added into 1.8. Probably we cannot call it as a new feature, but probably we can call it as a new class added into the util package since 1.8. Okay. Noticeably, this optional is a final class. So probably you cannot extend them, and then you cannot use them for further expansions. So you're blocked from not expanding this optional version because it's a final class, and obviously final class cannot be overridden, right? So that's what it means. Now, so as I said, it's a generic styled class. So they have taken any type as an uh, as a generic version, and then there are some set of functionalities out here. So the first thing is looking at it. There's an API method called empty. Okay, you can create an empty optional. An optional type can be literally empty. Okay, then you have multiple methods are there. Probably we'll see more. The most essential one that we usually use, like off. Okay, so off is to cook up the optional object. You want to create the optional object, then you can go for off. But literally it's a class, right? Optional is a class. So you are entitled to create an instance for it, but you're not entitled to inherit. You're not allowed to inherit, but obviously we can create an instance for it. So if you want to create a version of optional object, then you can make use of off object. Then we have off nullable, okay, of nullable. Then we have get method. So is present, if present is empty, okay, if present else, I mean if present or else. So likewise, there are some set of methods as you can see here, right? So a lot of methods are there, but let's see what are these methods are useful for, the majorly used methods. But please make a note of it that the optional is a class and it's a general purpose usage. Okay, so what is the definition from the documentation they provide? Hope it's visible. Let me zoom in. Okay, so what is optional? Optional is a container. Okay, is a container. Make a note of it. Optional is like more like a collection. Collection is also a container, right? So optional is also like a container. Okay, a container object, but not directly collection. It's like a collection. It's like a container. That's why it's a part of java.util. It's coming under the package of java.util. Okay, so a container object which may or may not contain a value. Okay, uh, so may or may not contain a value. Typically, it represents that it might hold a reference or it might not. It might be null also. Okay, so if a value is present in this container, if a value is present, what will happen? If a value is present uh, at code, which is like a method like is present. Okay, is present is to check whether the value is present or not. So we'll be using a method like is present. If the value is present, it returns true. If the container, so this is a container. Let's assume that this is a container and the container is having some object. If the container has some object, okay, it has some value in it, then it returns true. But if a container, which is ideally having nothing, it's empty. Right now the container is empty. So what is this container is? Container is nothing but the optional object, right? If it is empty, if no value is present in the container, okay, then what's going to happen is the object is considered empty. The optional object is considered empty, okay, and it returns false for the one of the operation called is present. Hope you're getting it right. So we are dealing with objects. That is what it means. We are trying to deal with objects here. When the object is there in the optional object, like container, when the optional container contains an object, it returns true. If the optional container doesn't carry any object, or if it is treated as an empty, then it returns false. By this way, we are actually arresting from not entering into the null pointer exception. Is this clear? So there are multiple additional methods are there, which is defined in the documentation itself. I guess we don't need to go more detail into it. We'll straight away step into the demonstration. Any questions you have, please let me know. Before I take you to the demo, please let me know if in case you have any queries. Hope till this point my voice was clear, right? Please do confirm on this, please.
Yes, I
Hope.
do. It's clear.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so any questions on this? So first one, to recall, optional is a class and it is a final class, so you cannot inherit them, right? Second, it is a class which is used for containing something in it, so we can call it as a container, right? It's like a container and it will contain something, some value. So an object, like if the object is there in the container, it returns true. In the one of the operation called is present is one of the operation or the method. When you call this present is present on top of the optional object, then if it is there with object, it returns, the method returns a boolean which is true. If not, it's going to return. If not means identically it is like empty. Okay, so it is equivalent to null. Then obviously it is going to return false. Okay, so hope I made myself to make it a little clear. If you still have any questions, please do let me know. Okay, so what we can do here is let's say string. Okay, string object. So optional object equals optional dot. See, there are some set of methods, right? Optional dot. I want to create a new object, new optional object, but it's going to be an empty object. Explicitly, you can create an empty object, right? Now, sys out optional object dot is empty. So what's going to happen? It returns true, right? The outcome is true. But this is not what we wanted, right? So ideally I can say string employee name equals null, and I can just replicate this line. So once we replicate this, instead of empty, I can say optional dot off. Okay, we have two things. One is off, another one is off nullable. Right now I'm going for off nullable. The string is ename. Okay, so let this be 1. Now it's all about optional 1, the optional object 1, and we are checking whether it is empty or not. Okay, let's see what's going to be the output. True, still empty. Why it is still empty? The reason it's still empty, it's because I'm trying to push the string object. I'm trying to push the string object into the optional via off nullable. This line will help us in creating an optional object that is like a container, creating one object, but that object is already null. It is only storing null into it. It is empty. Ideally, it is empty now, right? So this object doesn't carry anything, even though I forwarded the ename. Even though I forwarded ename, the reference is nothing because the object is pointed to null. Correct. So I mean, it's ideally empty. It's ideally empty. So let's think of this way. I'm just giving some reference. Sorry. Now it is false. Why it is false? Because this optional object is not empty. Why it is not empty? Because I've created an optional object on top of what object? On top of what object I created the optional object? On top of non.
String.
Yeah, string is fine. Non-null object, correct? I created this optional object on top of a non-null object. Is that correct or not? Yes. It's a non-null object because we have a reference. String is an immutable object, right? So we have a reference in it. So that reference is stable for creating an optional object, which is a container. Now the container is no more empty. It is carrying some reference, some junk value like this, which is pointing to the location where that reference is. And in that reference, you have the value called subarray, and that is none other than the string. Correct? But before, what happened was, even though I pushed ename is pointing to a null reference. Null, nothing is there. So obviously this container is empty. In that case, is empty was returning true. But this time it is returning false. The reason is we carry some reference to it. So to be more precise, for your understanding, we can even do it this way. So let me go ahead and explicitly create new string. Okay, new string like this, right? So you will get the, you will be compromised now that yes, you have created an instance. Before, at least, it doesn't seem to be an instance. But ideally, when you create a variable of string, it's actually an object reference, right? So we created an explicit object with some value. So in this case, what's going to happen? Again, it's false. It's not empty. The reason is we have an explicit instance. Is that clear? Is this, are you identifying what's happening here? So through the optional, you can test through the optional, you can test whether the object that's been loaded is empty or not. Okay, if it is, so let's say, for example, I have another object string, let's say employee ID equals null, right? Now, if I don't have an optional and if I directly go ahead, emp ID dot, let's say, to uppercase, what will happen? What do you think that will happen on top of calling this method when the object is already assigned to a null? That's a well-known output, right? Everyone knows about it, that it will end up with a null pointer exception. That's what is happening, correct? Null pointer exception. Do you all agree with this? Why? Because the method is called on top of an empty object. But if you go with optional, of course it is going to be empty only, but you can apply a check. Is empty. If it is empty, you better don't do this uppercase. You're getting it? But or else what you have to do, if emp ID not equals null, then you can perform the operation of to uppercase. This is the old fashion of code. But instead of using this old fashion of code, we can go for the modernized way of handling your null pointer scenarios with the help of this optional. But optional has many features other than just the check of a not null. It has many features. That's what which we are going to learn step by step. So till this point, if you have any questions, please do let me know so that I'll give you clarity before we dwell into more use case based understanding of the optional. Any questions, please do let me know. So this method is used for creating empty what? Optional. This method is used to create optional with some object in it, or it will create a null. If the object is there, that object will be stored in the optional object. Otherwise, it will store the null, means it refers to empty. This is explicitly creating an empty object, empty optional object, explicitly creating empty object, wherein here, based on the object that you forward, if the object is not null, then the object is getting stored in the optional object container. If the object what you forward here is already a null, then obviously the nullable will be injected, and that means it is empty. So that's what this off nullable is. But we do have off method, right? We just saw that off nullable. What is the difference? We'll see the difference shortly. But temporarily, to give you a better understanding of this optional style, I just wanted to explain this. Any question? So what type of a method? Another question, if in case I wanted to ask myself, I'll ask, hey, what type of a method is this empty? Empty is a static method. And that's the reason we are calling it on top of what name? The class name, optional, right? So there are some set of static methods that we have, which we can directly invoke. We can directly invoke on top of the name of the optional class. Off nullable is static. Off is static, right? What are the methods we have? Empty, off nullable, off, right? These are static methods, but we have instance methods also. For instance methods, you need to use the optional instance. Then only you will be able to see all the list of methods. See, there are hell a lot of methods are there. All these methods are listed. It's because those methods are instance method. So that requires the optional instance in place to see all those methods. Okay. Yeah. So where else? I mean, if you need furthermore explanations, please do let me know in a specific area so that I can explain it my best. I guess I'm trying to give you more clarity on all areas. Very important. If you go for a Java interview and if Java 8 is uh, one of the JD, then sure they'll be questioning on optional as well.
Will it reduce any number of lines of code uh, by
No,
using this
obviously
option?
not. Optional is not meant for reducing lines of code. Their intention is don't compare this with lambdas. Lambdas are different, optional is different. But lambda kind of syntax can be used in optional methods, but we cannot compare them. Okay, so optional is not helping us in reducing lines of code, but optional is helping us in writing a quality code. Okay, so that it never ends up with any uh, ad hoc situations, and it's more modernized. It's more self-explanatory by looking at the code, and the code gives you it's a clean code. It's a clean slate code where any developer can understand what's actually happening behind the scene. Ultimately, there's nothing to talk about reducing. Obviously, if you see that we only increase the style of code, but there are some sort of use cases where these optionals can really fit in well. Always you should not go for optional. Okay, not necessary. You can just go for the old style code of not equals null or equal to null, and then you can evaluate them. But ideally, as you go forward in the era of new era of Java application development, you'll only see the usage of optionals everywhere. So that's the reason that we should get used to this optional rather than just sticking to that old style of code of applying it as if the object is not equal null or equals null. So let's not go behind that style anymore. Let's try to migrate to this new dimension of handling the null pointer scenarios. This is exclusively for null pointer. You cannot just think of having a handling of array index out of bounds exception. No, these are not developed for handling any type of exception. This is exclusively for resolving the null pointer. The main reason I'm saying this again and again is because it is going to come from some anonymous component. So when it is coming from an anonymous component, so means let's say DBA, okay, DBA code, database code, okay, like for example, technically here we call it as DAO, right? So data access object. From there, it hits the DB, okay, and this will cook up some object and return. So what if in case if that particular database table doesn't have a particular row for finding a particular employee called 111, where such employee doesn't exist in the table, and obviously this has to manipulate that object entity object, and the entity object should be returned as null because DAO has nothing to do with it. The database doesn't have anything relevant to the ID of 111. So look at that point of a scenario, how we are going to deal with. That's the kind of a use case that I'm going to show right now. Yeah. Any other question? So let's go straight into another class, optional demo 2. So here, let's just quickly create a class user. So it's just a class, and this class is going to have some what to say, private string user ID and private string password. Okay, so we have a couple of fields, and I'm just going to create a parameterized constructor and a getters alone. So it's enough to have just getters, and we need source constructor. Okay, so assume this as what, a domain class, or let's say it's like an entity class. Okay, so now this entity class is going to be used by another class, let's say DBDAO class, right? So this class is going to have a specific method, let's say public static get user data. So I have a method called get user data, which is going to return the object of user, right? So in this, we can return null. Is this possible? Keeping in mind, hitting the DB and found no records. So obviously, the entity object is going to be null. So to be more readable of the code, let's say user equals null deliberately. I'm not writing the real-time code for connecting to the DB, but it's just a simulation, right? We need to understand that we hit the DB, we hit the table, and we are trying to fetch a record, but unfortunately we don't have a record in it, and so the user object could not be created, and it's kept as null. This is the scenario. Is the scenario clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good. So now what we do is we'll just get into the main code, and here we are going to use, you can notice that I've just voluntarily created this method as a static. The reason I created this as a static is because I just wanted to invoke the method straight from the class name. I don't want to invest time on creating an instance. So just a demo purpose, right? So we can just call this method. Now after calling this method, what am I supposed to do? So let's say I just wanted to evaluate the get user ID. Okay, And if the user ID is same as like what been provided by the actual user, so let's say S001, in that case, you can, it's just for it's just for equals of string. It's just for an evaluation purpose. So say, hi user, you are authenticated. Okay, something like this, right? So what is the output now? What is the output that we are going to get now?
Null pointer exception.
Sorry, I didn't get you.
It will throw null, sir.
Yeah. So the expected output is a null pointer exception. So why is it happening so? Because what is written from another component? User object, but the user object is filled with what? Null. While you're getting it, get user data, what it returns is user reference with the null. So when you operate, so this whole line is actually returning what? Null. With that null, you're calling what method? Get user ID, land you in a null pointer exception. Correct? That's what is happening. So what we could have done in order to avoid this use case, it's better to be safer side. There are possibilities that in this scenario, you might be ending up with a null pointer exception. So first thing to do here is we need to create a user and call the method. Okay, if user dot, or you will say user is not equals null, right? If user is not equals null, then you can do this. If user is not equals null, then you can do this. Correct? So now what's going to happen? Obviously null pointer exception might not occur, but output is empty. That's because the if is failed. So out of this if we have to go for, it's pretty old styled code, this kind of a if else. Okay, so that's why we tend to avoid this no more in the following era of application development. So sorry, no record found, something like this. Now it's more reasonable that this application is pretty well handled. It's more clean code. No way that this can be leaked out for a null pointer exception scenario. But this is a very old style, right? An old style of use case. So what we do right now is I'll keep this class as is so that at any time you can just walk through on this code and do a quick review before you go for an interview and be more strong on answering the questions. So I'm going to create optional demo 3 and just copy the same code from here to here. Just change the name of the class to 3. Now, instead of writing this set of code, okay, what we can do is we can try to deal with optional. But how can we deal with optional? How do we deal with optional? Okay, we can either return it directly from there. Okay, so let's say if you get to know that the object is empty, something which you didn't get as a result from the DB, here itself you can say optional dot off. Now off can be used only when you want to return a non-null value. Off method is explicitly used only to return an optional object with some object in it. It's a container which should have some object in it. You cannot return an empty option object. You cannot create an empty optional object. Please make a note of it. The difference between off and off nullable is, okay, let's execute and see so that you will understand. Okay, now if I place off nullable, and here it should be of optional carrying user. So it's kind of a wrap. Okay, before we output it directly with user, but now the user is wrapped with some optional protected case. Optional is like a protection case for your objects. Okay, that protection case can help you to avoid the null pointer exceptions. So it's been protected, but deliberately we are returning, we are creating an off with null, and now it's no more a user return. Instead, you're going to return optional of user. Okay, so now in return, it's not going to be anymore a user. It's going to be optional user, correct? And okay, so let's say optional user. Here it is again optional user and optional user here. Okay, so now if you try to deal with this optional user, okay, so I want to get the object. How do you get the object from the optional? Optional is wrapping this user object. How do you get that? By using get method. Get method is again returning a generic type. So right now this optional carries what in it? It's a user, so it's going to return the user object. But if you notice keenly, the user object is not there because the user object is deliberately null. But actually this will lead to a problem. Actually it is giving this null means off null will actually end up with an exception. I'll just show you. So if you say get, okay, to get the user object like this, it is like a challenge. Because it seems to be everywhere protected. Or is a problem? Okay, that class is already there right here. Correct. Okay. So let's say let's comment out this whole code for a while. Okay, so if we go ahead and run them, see what's going to happen. It's a null pointer exception. Then there's no point in using optional. Correct? There's no point in using optional. Closely monitor, it all started from the main method, right? 42 line number 42. You go to the call of the get user data. Immediately you should notice that the exception is occurring from this 31 line number 31. 31 is what? This line. So actually this line is not raising an exception. This line is not raising an exception. This line itself is directly raising an exception. When off method is dealt with null, when off method of the optional is dealt with null, it will raise immediately a null pointer exception. So it's not a good habit to use off when you feel the object might be nullable. Right? So that is used only when the object is not null, if the value is not null. So what is the replacement for that is we can go for off nullable. What off nullable says is, hey, listen, this off nullable is eligible to return an object to this optional container if the object is carrying some reference. That is, if it is non-null, sure, I can store that object. If not, I will create an optional object with empty reference, with the empty container. But I will never throw null pointer exception. I will never throw null pointer exception. You capture that, you ensure that it is null, that's fine, okay. But it's you who have to handle it, but I'm not going to. Either I will keep the optional object as empty, or I will place the object which is having a reference in it. So it's moreover same as like what we discussed earlier in the string object, but this time it's just replaced with user object. That's all. Okay, so this is what is now practically happening here. Okay, if you closely monitor, so that's actually okay, I guess. Okay, so now this null optional dot null optional dot off nullable is helping us to return the object if the object is having some reference. If not, also it's an empty optional object that is going to be cooked up. Okay, so let's go ahead and run them. So now when you say get, now the line, okay, if you notice the line that is actually raising an exception is not this one, not this one. It gave, but it is happening in the 45th line. When you say get, it returns no such element exception. Okay, so it's not a good practice to directly apply for a get without applying a check. Without applying a check from the optional, don't try to go for getting the object. Don't try to grab the object from the optional without checking the optional. So first thing is please check the optional, whether the optional is empty or not. Please check it. Once after you check, only you should try to grab the object that the container is having. Okay, try to grab the object that the container is going to hold or the container is holding. But never ever try to grab the optional object via the get method without the conditional check, the optional check. So always you should up. That's the point for going for optional. The reason for going for optional is to apply the conditional check on the optional whether it is empty or not, and then you drive through. But if you notice that this line is not raising an exception here, noticeably, because it's off nullable. Off operates only if the object is non-null, but off nullable can act on top of an object with the reference or without a reference. That is non-null and null object. For both the case, it can able to operate. But the exception that's actually occurring is from the get method because it is empty. So what we can do here is you can just think of having the check. Okay, if optional, okay, optional user dot is present. We have is empty, is present, and we have something called if present. Okay, we'll compare all. You can check is empty or is present either way. Is empty means you are checking whether it is empty or not. If a value is not present, returns true, otherwise false. Is present, if a value is present, returns true, otherwise false. So both are like opposite version. Okay, but anyways, it's going to operate on top of the boolean, right? So you can say is present to be more reasonable, right? It's present rather than is empty. If that is the case, then you can think of having the assignment for the user. Okay. Okay. So in this case, anyways, this get will not get into it because, so let's say sys out of user, which I want to do it outside. Okay. Now if we execute this, anyways, we are just going to see the output as null. Okay, this null, it's because the user is null. It never got, I mean, we never got into the if, because optional user is present with some value. No, it is not present with some value because it's null. You can notice here, right? If it is present, so let's say I'm going to create an object like this. with some reference in it equals new user of, it's going to be skilled at subapology.com, comma, say a password like this, right? So now you are passing the user down here rather than null. So okay, this, okay. So now it is with some reference. Now let's see here. We need to pass user. Let's run this. Now you got the reference. Okay, you got the reference of this user, which is displayed here. So with this user, now what you can do? Dot get user ID. Pretty good. You will never end up with any exception. You get that user ID to be displayed. It's well handled. Is that correct or not? So you should know the difference between off. Off is to cook up the optional object only when the object is not null. But off nullable is eligible to do both ways. Even if it's null, it's okay. It returns empty. If not, it returns the actual instance that's going to be stored inside the container of the optional. If you have any questions, please let me know. So you can either shift your thought from is empty to is present or is present to is empty. It's always to go on a positive thought. So it's always good to have a start with is present rather than saying it as is empty. OK, in which use case can we use is empty and is present? It's up to your choice. There's no much difference. It's just the terms to be used is present or is empty. So is empty is deliberately you're looking out for empty object. Deliberately you're look out for empty. I need empty. Then probably you can go for like how we say not null or double equal to. Which one will you use? You want to check for double equal to or you want to check for not equal to? Which one do you want to use? It depends on the use case. The same way here is present and is empty. It's up to your choice. How do you want to use it? OK. So I'll pause here. If you have any questions, please do raise it so that we'll get clarified before we move on. OK. I have another style of writing this. OK. This 3 lines, which we can write it in a different style. So let's say if present. OK, instead of is present, I'm going to use is present optional user dot if present. OK, if present, if it holds, right? If it holds the object, then you do this. You do this line. OK, that's what it means. So if present, right, you can get the object. It's a consumer style. If you see here, the parameter is consumer. See, as I said, if present is taking a consumer functional interface as a parameter. So I'm going to write a lambda out here. It's like user object, right? You're trying to get the user object and then apply it. And here it's going to be u, no need of a semicolon. Now I'm going to comment out this, the 3 lines. OK. Now let's run this. So this time I don't want user ID. Rather, I just ask for a password. Get password. Right. So here it is. Same thing what we did here in the 3 line is now been written in a 1 liner of statement, correct? So what happens here is in if present, okay, if present, you do this. If present, you do this. If not, then what it will do? If not, then what it will do? If not, what it is going to do? So right now I'm returning empty, right? It does nothing. But you never end up with any null pointer exception. So which one would you prefer? You go for the if present. It's more shortened style of code. But only deeper understanding of skilled developers will make use of this style of code. Not everyone. But if you want to do more complex operations, then obviously you go for the other style which I've written on the line number 50 to 55. That style is applicable still because you want to make a little complex version. You have to manipulate the logic a little more expanded. Then probably you can go for the other alternate option, but you still have this style of code as well. And this lambda can also be expanded, but still it does nothing actually. Okay, the if present is actually not ending up with any exception because the return of the if present is always void. If it is there, it's okay. Otherwise, it's not. This is clear. So this style seems to be more pretty good to handle. So we have just a second. If present or else. Okay, if present or else. So what is this if present and or else is trying to do? If you see this or else, so it's a consumer and you also have a runnable. Okay, it still returns void, but you have a consumer style of code and also you have a runnable style of code. So if present, if a value is present, performs the given action with the value, otherwise performs the given empty based action. Okay, if it is empty, you have to perform some runnable style of code. So for that, you can still have some logic to be written. Okay, so I would say the second version is a runnable. So for runnable, I would just give system dot out. I'm using a method referencing operator. Okay, but ideally it's a second argument, right? So yeah, it's just an object. So what is this? Okay, this is for printing, right? Sorry, opened here. So system dot out. But actually we need to print something. So ideally this logic won't work. We'll just expand this style of code. The second argument is a runnable. Runnable is also a functional interface, right? One. This is additional. If present or else. Okay. Yeah. So this was doing nothing actually, right? If it's null, but see this one, the same code which is slightly expanded. If present, you do this operation. If not, you take this. So what it says, sorry object is null. Why it says sorry object is null? It's because deliberately we are returning what optional empty empty optional, right? So instead of this, if in case we are going to fit in with some object, a real-time object reference, then you're going to get the password. So it won't go to the else. Okay. Is that clear? The password is printed. So any question? So which one you want to use it? You just think of based on the use case again. Okay. So this is for if present. If it's not present, if it's empty, if this optional container is empty, okay, then it will jump to the else. So if it's like, if it's same as like if else. So here I can apply some else and then I can do some logic here, right? So sorry, I can do some logic here the same way here, but it's a kind of a one method which takes a couple of functional interfaces as arguments. So these are some of the examples of functional interfaces you can directly think of. Both are functional interface. The first argument is consumer. The second argument is runnable. Okay, so both are what? Function interfaces. Is that clear? So any questions on this? So this is how we can safely handle the optional things. So this I'll be using frequently. I'm not sure. The next training which I'm planning to launch is on Spring Boot. Okay. But I'm not sure how soon that I will be starting because I need a little breathing space. Uh, so I need to do a lot of preparations for this to launch and to because this time I'm just planning to have more participants because it's a huge program and a lot of workaround will be done. So I want more participants for the Spring Boot. So after getting a good number of leads, then probably I'll be going with the Spring Boot. At that time, I'll be using effectively all the Java 8 features. Okay, Spring Boot is going to be more of interesting framework, right? So we'll leverage all the. It's already a modern version of Spring actually. Spring Boot is so we'll introduce even the Java 8, which is more modern. We'll also use Java 10. We'll also use. So if you see here, I could have just made this line even more modernized, right? Using the var keyword. So like which we'll try to integrate even Java 14 features are there, right? So we'll be using all those major features. 11 features and everything will be there in Spring Boot. Okay. So that's what is all about optional, and you have multiple methods. I guess from here on you'll have more option to learn. I'll just give you some briefing. Let's say we have something called or else throw. Okay, or else throw option. So how we can use this is this is a close of this method, right? Yeah. Okay, this is if present. Okay. if you look at these methods, okay, I'll be unable to use my pen. So you can see that there are or, okay. If a value is present, returns an optional describing the value. Otherwise, it returns an optional produced by the supplying functions. So or is taking a supplier, or else it just returns an alternate object, or else get, or else throw, or else throw a specific exception. Okay. So or else throw will deliberately throw no such element exception, or else throw will throw us uh, if a value is present, it returns that particular value. Otherwise, throws an exception produced by the exception supplying function. So these are all the methods, okay, all these methods which you can see out here in the off nullable. Okay. So you can see all the or coming there. Okay. It's a part of the nullable, of nullable. So what we can do is we can understand this way. Of the user. Okay. Firstly, we should have user. So you can use this or references, okay, or references to off or off nullable also. Okay, either method you can actually line up. So I can say or else. Okay, I'm just saying or else instead of or. I don't want to use supplier. Instead, I'm going to create a new user saying Sabari ABC. Now what will happen? What we are trying to achieve on this? This is a style of code where or else is actually focused on returning a specific object. Okay, if in case the object is going to be nullable. Okay, directly it is applied on top of this or. The return of this is optional. On the optional, actually, we are trying to apply that or else. That is how it means. So we can use this or related methods anywhere. It's not necessary that it should be bounded on off or off nullable, but I'm just giving you a reference that off is actually pointed to the optional object. Off nullable is also pointed to generate an optional object, but you can also apply additional or references. You can throw an exception if in case you want it, or you can just return some dummy object out of it. Okay, so that's what the reference of using or using an optional. So it's directly an optional. So I cannot optional. I cannot use those methods directly on the optional as I already listed because those are reference methods. You need an optional object to work on top of those optional methods, the instance methods. But wherein here, as a static on top of an optional class, we are having three methods: empty, off, and off nullable. All three returns, as you can notice, all three returns optional. And after getting the optional object, you are eligible to use the instance methods which are lined up like is present, is empty, if present or else. Then you have or, you have just or else. So there are different styles of codes which you can think of using on top of this optional. These many features we never had in the old style, right? Just by applying a condition like equal to null or not equal to null. Just a pretty straightforward and old style version. But this has many features in it, right? So we can try to leverage them. We can try to use the Lambda kind of style of code wherever applicable so that it's more readable. It's more shortening the lines of code as well if you integrate with Lambda rather than having more uh, non-sugared line of code like having a code like 51 to 56. As you can see, it's a little bit of expanded style of code, whereas here it's just a one-liner of statement. So we can think of using them accordingly. So if you have any questions, please do let me know. Any questions? Okay, I'll just think of just a second. Okay. Let's say this is for your further understanding of that concepts. Okay, I'm just trying to rethink. So let's go for extends exception. Then it's all about a constructor, which takes string message, then do super of the message. Okay, this you can understand, right? These are self-explanatory. I don't think you need a further explanation. It's just creating a custom exception class. So this I can use it here. Okay. So in the off nullable, okay, I have or else throw, right? Or else throw. It's actually taking what as a parameter. It's not taking, or else throw will give a default no such element exception, but rather I want to use some customized version. So it's all about a supplier, right? So you forward the supplier is just to return something. It doesn't take anything as an input. It just returns, right? So we can do it like this. New, I'm sorry, yeah, new this exception, right? So this is like or else throw is deliberately throwing some exceptions. You're deliberately throwing some exceptions so that you can handle it. Either you return the object directly or you throw some exception, but this is not about optional because you go with or else further. So or else further returns an object. You can see finally the or else method returns an object, right? So we can think of having this as user, right? If in case required, you can just think of having some user object also. That doesn't make any big difference. So cannot convert object to user. What does it mean? It's a return of exception. Why there's an error? Type mismatch cannot convert from object to optional of user. Yeah, obviously it returns an object. That's okay. Okay. So we have to say it's user 1. Just typecast them to user. I'll tell you what is actually happening. So it is like off nullable, okay, off nullable, optional dot off nullable of null. If it is null, okay, if the object that is we are going to forward here is going to be of null, if it is present, like it's more straightforward, okay. If the object is referenced, then we are going to manipulate that object as a return. If not, or else you throw deliberately an exception is what we are saying. So or else throw is deliberate, right? You can now need not, you can do the optional work here itself. You need not return the optional. You can either return user or you can raise an exception. You don't need to return optional of user. I'm manipulating here in the same function of code itself. Optional of nullable user, if it's the object is there, you extract it and return the object, or else you throw the exception is what I'm saying. Okay, so here you can understand the use case of, so obviously that user doesn't exist because in the database the forwarded user ID doesn't exist. So sorry, no user available. We can raise it and it's a custom exception. Uh, so this can be fine tuned, right? How we can fine tune this? Any idea? How we can fine tune this line? How we can fine tune this line of code? This can be further used with the method referencing operator, right? So it's just about return something, nothing else. So how we can do is, but technically speaking, you will not have any. Uh, it should be like a kind of no argumented constructor. So then only it makes some sense out of it. So that case, I'm not going to carry any message. Probably I might print something here. Okay. Or let's have another no argumented constructor. Uh, okay. It has to be raised as exception, but not necessary that custom message is required. So I can think of having this to be written like this. We have the constructor method referencing, right? So how do we go for constructor method referencing? The class name, user not available exception, colon, new. That's all we have to do. So this will raise this as an exception, but you will not get any custom messages. So ideally you can use this line when you don't have a custom exceptions. Please use this line if there is a predefined exception classes are there. Predefined exception classes in the Java API package itself. Predefined exception classes you want to use like illegal argument exception, arithmetic exception, in array index or outbound exception. If you want to handle with that kind of thing, then you better go for this style. If it's a custom exception, it's always good to have this style. Okay, so now you can see the two different styles of code, right? One style says that you return it with the custom exceptions with the message. The other one is you can go for default exception classes to be picked up. At that time, you can make use of the style of code with constructor method referencing. This is an example of constructor method referencing. You just create an instance by calling the no argumented constructor. That's all right. So that's how it is. Okay, so I guess I try to cover as much as possible. So in case you have any questions, please do let me know. Here we are supposed to throw this exception, right? Unhandled exception. throws, because we are raising it. It's more like throw the exception. So we need to handle them, or else you throw it from here and the caller will handle it. So here where you need to catch this. Okay. This is clear. So a lot of understanding sort of optional, right? It's just an optional, but it's just to deal with null pointer exception, but indeed it has a lot of internal features, a lot of features. So only when you start meddling with these codes in your project work, probably you will get to use with this style of code. Okay. Okay, so I guess if there are no questions, then we'll quickly move into date. Dates are straightforward, not of too complex. So just quickly end up, what is the thing that has been ideally added in dates? Okay, not of too much of discussions. So so far it was like this. We were actually using the date packages like this: import java.sql.date. This is how we were being told to use in Java. But today, starting from Java 8, we have an exclusive API, okay, which is called as java.time package exclusively. You have time subpackages like chrono, time zones, formattings, temporal zones, and stuff like that. So this time is a new package that's been introduced in Java 8 date API. This is something which you need to note down. So in an interview, if they ask any questions, you can say what's new in Java 8 date. Then you should say there is a specific API package being declared, and that's called as java.time. It's not java.date. It is java.time. Straight to the Java package. Straight to the Java package. Not even inside util. Not even inside SQL. Straight into the Java package. They have dedicatedly derived with one package called time. Java.time, which deals with all styles of data operations. Okay. With old style and new style, what's the difference? Old style, yes, of course, we are using SQL date, and probably there are a little bit of workaround to be done in codes. But here it's little more modern fashioned and supports different time zones, more easily understandable, straightforward lines of code. You have chaining, method chainings are acceptable in Java time, which we never had before. The method chaining is like dot, 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 like how we do in the streams. The same way here we can do it with the method chaining. So such kind of features been added into it. Apart from that, however, we deal with the formatting options, formatter, date formatter, stuff like this. Those stuff like that can be applied here as well. But I just give you on the baseline of what to be understood from the date. Okay. So there in the old style, we use date equals new date of. So this is how we do in the old style, right? So we are trying to create a new date object. So when we are using SQL date, or even let's go for util date. I don't want to use SQL. Let's say I go for a util date. SQL date is what more profound to be used because it's more equivalent to the DB standards of date versions. So you can also go to a util and then use them. So this is date, which is going to have, sorry, there's no public static void. Public static void main string args. Sysout date. I'm just helping you to understand the difference. Okay, so that is what which we need to mainly cover up, because so here it is like date is printed. But if you look at the new style, okay, comparing with the new style, it's like local date. You have something called local date java.time. Local date equals local date, or let's say I want to fetch the current date. So local date dot, you have this method, static method called now. If you go to the local date, see that it's again a style of final class, which will have loads of static members in it. Okay. And all the methods like now is a example of static method. Okay. You have off, similar to like how we had for optional. Okay. But that there's nothing to do with optional. It returns the local date, getting the off of year, month, and day of month. It converts all these inputs into a local date. You will get it as a local date object. So likewise, there are enormous number of methods are there into it in the local date. So now is to get the current date. So let's say sysout now. So what's going to happen? You can see the difference. What's the difference? What is the difference that you can notice here? The first version, the old version, is directly manipulated with date and as well as time. But here in this new version, it's just working on top of date. I don't want to meddle with time. This is one headache that the developer used to face, right? So we need to trim out this altogether and then we need to work on top of this date. But this one seems to be more straightforward, that you directly work on date. But if in case you want to work on top of the time, what am I supposed to do? And that's where the another thing comes up. You have something called a local date time. Okay, local date time now equals local date time dot now. Okay, right? So now with date with time, let's say date with time. Date with time. Okay, so you can see now it is with time. Um, so this is more preferable actually. Okay, you can think of which one do you want it, and you can operate on top of it. Now the next thing is from the local date time, you can also say, now what is the time? It's 1833, which is almost 6:30 IST, right? So I want to do a minusing of this. Okay, minus days, minus with temporal types, minus days, minus hours. So let's go for minus hours of 1. So now instead of 1833, it will be 1733, right? That is 533, 534 IST. Okay, you can directly minus them, minus hours. Okay, so there are some set of methods like that which you can play around with. Okay, so adjust into a specific temporal standards of date. Okay, you have plus days plus hours, like how you have minus, you can add 1 hour or 1 day or 1 week, 1 year. Okay, so there are a lot of methods on top of this date time and as well as for date. Okay, after this now you can use them as well. So but I just wanted to give you an understanding of the formatting work. How do we do a formatting work? So let's take an example. We have something called date time formatter. Okay, there's a datetime formatter coming from the java.time.format package. Java.time.format package date formatter equals date time formatter dot of pattern. It is like giving a pattern. Okay, what is a pattern that's right now printed is y month and then day. I just want to reverse them. Okay, dd y. Okay, so this is one thing, and I just want to get it in a string. So formatted date equals, we already have this now, right? The date, we can use that. That date need to be formatted. So dot, we have a special method called format with this date formatter. So ideally, what's going to happen is you can see the difference. I'm printing now. Okay, I have to print this now, and I am going to print the formatted now. One is formatted now. Let's see what's the difference. Sys out formatted. So here it is now, and here it is formatted now. If you see them, you can notice the difference. What is the difference? Before it was with default format, but right now it's a DD, right? DD, 8 is MM, and 2021 is your YYY standards. So you can think of having a formatting for it. You can keep a ready-made formatter created like this. Whatever date that comes in, okay, that date can be formatted on top of the formatter. Then you will get the specific formatted string, and that string can be further applied for your DB communication, because your DB database format is DDMMYYY, but your application format is YYYYMMDD. Hope you are getting it right. So in that case, you can quickly make use of it. It's just a 3-liner statement. It's just a 2-liner statement, right? Date formatter object, date time formatter of off pattern, specify the pattern. You get the formatter, custom created formatter, and the formatter can be applied on the format method of any local date object, and then you can try formatting it. Is this clear? So this are all some of the added features. There also you have a formatter, but you have to do a lot of work around in the old style. But here it's pretty straightforward. So we can see a little bit of further code. So let me create date time demos 2. So if you have any questions on this, please do let me know before I take you to the next final demo of this date. If you wanted to have better understanding. So there are 2 things that you should notice. In this new datetime API, you have a date workaround to be done separately. Another one is you can do a workaround with date time separately. So for that, you have a specific local date time. You can do a formatting with the help of date time formatter. Any patternized format that you wanted, acceptable form patternized, can be worked around. Is this clear? So there's one last interesting thing, as I told you, right? Chaining the process. You can chain things in datetime API. So that's what I wanted to show you. So the first thing that we can do is okay. So we'll just look at the chained operations like this. First, let's go for a now. Local date now. And I would say what local date dot now. I guess it would be good if we go for local time. Sorry, local date time dot now. Okay. So what this is going to do is local date time object. We know that this is going to print along with the date and time. That's well known. So if I run this, so we get along with the time, right? Time references. Okay. So in this, I can do a chaining. Okay, along with the now, what I can do is I can use something called truncated. Okay, truncated to, we can say a chrono unit enumeration. It is coming from java.time.temporal package. Okay, so chrono unit and then dot, we can say hover. Please truncate the hovers. I don't want the hovers. It's an enumeration. Okay, if you go to this, you will notice that it's an it's an enum enumeration of temporal unit. You have all the enumerated types. Okay, so I just want to truncate this. So let's see how it's going to be, if this is having any meaning. Yeah. So truncated till hovers. That it is still hovers. You are truncating it till hovers. If it's like further, I mean it's like further truncations you want, then you need to apply accordingly. So if you see day, or if it's a date, you can say days. You can say off days, hours, milliseconds, minutes. Here we have minutes. So you will get the minutes also to be displayed. Okay, 6:42 minutes. 6:42. Yeah, 18 hours, 42 minutes. Right. So truncated till minutes. Actually, this will be like till what you want to truncate. That is meaning. So these are very straightforward operations that we can do, which is again part of this new API. Okay, one last thing that I would like to explain here is I have something called zoned date time. Okay, this will be quite interesting. Zoned date time, like how we have date, local date time. The same way we have zoned date time. You know what zone means, right? Europe, Asia, specific, and so on. So I want this type of operations to be done. In that case, I can say now, and I can say local date time. I'm including local date time dot now, generating a now. And further, I'm going for a chaining. So dot, I'm just increasing the plus hours. I'll tell you why I'm going to increase them to plus hours of 1 hour to be increased. Right now it's 16:45, so it's need to be increased to 1. Then I want to use with temporal adjuster. Okay, with temporal adjuster. There is a class called temporal adjusters class dot. You have a method called next, a static method. Next, in this, I want to shift. Okay, I want to shift. Today is Saturday, right? So we can say next day of week. You have a next day of week, which is again time package. So day of week dot, I would say Saturday. What is the next Saturday date is, right? And it should be more specifically, dot at a specific time zone. I don't want IST. I want to figure out Europe. Okay, so at zone, inside that we will be using something called zone ID. The parameter should be using a zone ID, which is again an abstract class in Java time. Zone ID dot off. You can use off method to cook up the object. So off, what you can do is you can pass the zone Europe slash Paris. I want to work around with Paris. I want to know what is Paris time on next Saturday, minusing this current hour from our current IST. Okay, so this is what this line is. I'll just format it. Now it's more readable, right? After formatting, you just look at this and see. If you have any question, do let me know. So we can just print now. just look at this. It's a straightforward understanding. Okay. Now it's getting you the current date and time. Date and time. The next one is hours, means plus hour, plus 1. That is the meaning. So if it's 1642, it's 1742. And from the day, that is today, Saturday, is what? What is the date today? 8 or 7. Yeah, sorry. Able to. Okay. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13, right? Yeah. 13 or 14, whatever. I guess it's 14. Okay. So 14th of 2021 August, and it should be Europe time standards. It should be Europe time zone. That's what I need to print. So that's what it means. So if I print this, good. What is the time zone of Europe Paris? Plus 02. Plus 02. 14th Saturday. 14th is a Saturday. 1947, because the current time is 1847. 1847 is plus 1 hour is 1947 of Paris time zone, and moved the adjustment, temporal adjustment to next Saturday. Correct. Now, if I want to bring it back to the time zone of India, right? So I could say something like Asia / Calcutta. That would be acceptable, right? Asia / Calcutta. Good. So now you would see that we are back to IST standard. IST standard, you all know that, right? 0530 is the IST standard plus 0530. The IST standard of time. Asia, Calcutta, and 19 is because plus 1. And of course, it's again 14 of the date because Saturday. If I give Sunday, then obviously it will become 15. The next Saturday, the next Sunday. Okay. So what you are learning here is a lot of things: temporal adjusters, zone ID, right? Zone date time. You can just like that play around, and it's easily understandable because all these are chaining the date operations. This is called as chaining date operations. You don't need to work with multiple objects separately because that's how it was earlier. But now it's more like a streams operation. It looks like a streams operation, but this is not streams. Okay, it's only a chaining of date operations, date operation methods. Is this clear? So if you have any questions, please do let me know. I'm done with it. And of course, here you can see chrono unit. You can manipulate with some chrono units, minutes, hours, and days to get truncated. You can truncate the dates, times till whatever point that you wanted. You can truncate them. Yeah. Any questions you have, please do let me know. Any questions? No questions? Probably you will have once after you start working on it. But please do practice. Don't just stop with the trainings and the demos what I'm showing. Please try to dwell more in deep. Obviously, only when you get the space for working on these, you will have more energy to work. So in your project, if you have a workaround on this, please grab them. If you get a story point, if you get a story on your sprint to work exclusively on date related story, please grab them and try to apply these skills so that you get trained and you educate people out there to use them. You can instruct your team to work on that. Yeah. Any questions, please do let me know. So that's it from my side. I guess I've done all the possible of coverages on all major areas, starting from the scratch. So yeah. So the next go is I'll be sharing the slides for your references, and probably I'll be sharing some exercise works which I'm preparing yet, which will be shared in the coming week. And I will also give you some references for further learnings on Java 8 and to keep continuing with that. Okay. And of course, yes, as we do in the earlier trainings, I'll be sharing the certificate as well. So I'll follow the same naming conventions, which I'm sorry, I'll follow your same the name pattern which you've given last time. So I'll be using the same pattern to come up with the certificates. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, sure, sir. We need some hands-on on this, so we have to work on it a lot.
Yes. Of course, you have to do a hands-on, right? That's why it's a this is helping you to probably it's like watching a movie. Okay. But if you want to retain every scene of the movie, then you have to keep recalling them, and you need to get dwelled into it, and then you need to practice it. So then only you can actually see the actual essence of using the Java 8 features. But I guess the learnings what you get would really help you to take up your interviews if in case you have some interviews lined up, or probably if you are going to interview someone, try to ask questions from here. Okay, so that you get practice. That's what I do. I ask questions from what I learn, so that I ensure whether that other person is able to convey with at least 50 percentage of response, and that's okay for me. Even if it's 100 percentage is not clear, that's okay, because that's my point of learning, right? But you keep engaging. The engagement is something very why I'm coming up with training like this on Saturdays. I do have families and I'm spending time here. Additionally, it's hell a lot of work every week, and after this training, now again I have to go to my sprint work, which is having next week. So I have to create stories in the Jira and keep doing that. But still, in spite of that, I'm doing this. Why? Because I don't want to leave the touch of the technology. Okay, when you give space, lost. So that's why I frequently come up with trainings like this, or I create some videos and then post it on YouTube and stuff like that. I always keep engaging even after I got into the project. So I don't want to miss my field of learning. Okay, I always engage myself on learning, and plus I keep practicing a lot. So that's how it is. Yes. So I'll try to throw with some sort of use cases also, probably whenever I come across. Yes, I try to do that so that you can try to keep working on those use cases. Any other question? So the problem is the time. Time is everything. Time is running, right? So time keeps running. So we need to grab the time and do things whatever is possible within the time that we have. So whatever time it's going to be for the next. We are going to live with for 100 years, or we are going to live for 150 years, or we are going to just live for 50 years. Time is stipulated, so we try to do things within that time. Whatever is possible, let's try to do that. So it's a personal advice that you people can also engage on things like teaching to people, or probably on your passion. You can do many things during this pandemic period, so that you will have more space. Once we go back to office, it's not going to be the same style of work. Uh, I'm not sure if it's going to happen anytime nearer, but even though if it's going to be a different style. Most of the companies are offering you to work from home itself, and that's what I'm going to opt for. So I don't prefer going to office anymore. So I'll be working from home. So that's how. So because it gives me a way to work on my passion, and as well as I keep working for what the company needs. It's with more productivity. We can see more productivity because all my travel times are reduced, and then I'm fully focused on it. It motivates me for doing my passion of work simultaneously. I can take care of my family. We are closer with our family. We are closer with our kids. What else we need? So obviously, I'll be opting for work from home henceforth. Yeah, and that will help me to reach out to many people like you. Okay, and with the skills that I have, teaching is one of the skill that God have given to me. So I'm trying to leverage that skill and trying to impart as much as possible people to impart my knowledge to the others. So I in turn gained something out of it. So if you see, I'm forcing myself to teach this Java 8 again, and I'm again recalling it. Otherwise, I won't force myself. I won't dedicate some time to go and study on Java 8, which I will never do it. Even though I'm a learning passionate person, but still I don't find time to do it, or I don't intend to do it unless I motivate and force myself to take some sessions. So I engage on that and I keep revising it, and it helps me to recall things that I've learned earlier. Okay. I'll stop my gyans anyways. I'm going out of the scope. Anyone else? Anyways, only 3 members have joined today. That's okay. But yeah, Karthik. Anyone? So the slides which I'm going to share is going to help you a lot, probably. Yes, Karthik, please go ahead.
I'm good, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Manimala, do you have any questions?
Sir, we want to learn the theoretical deep. Which website we want to refer to? Oracle documentation.
Yeah, of course, documentation would help you a lot. So I advise you to take documentations. But apart from that, even though dwelling more deep, see, you cannot go more deeper and deeper on learning. Learning is something. It's a different style. Okay, one is you have, this is technology, this is programming, this is development. So you have to apply your practical skills rather than dwelling deep into the documentation. Of course, as and when I'm saying, if you want to learn something about plus hours, just go to the documentation and have a look at it. Quick look. There is a pretty good documentation about the method. Just understand what it does. You just come back and try to work around. Don't spend too much of time on documentation. Don't spend too much of time on reference links or references, or too much of theory, abstracts. No, that won't work around for long run. Okay, so that is my personal advice. But anyways, yes, of course, we still have a lot of references which I can share. That's not a problem. I'll do that anyways. But advisably, don't spend too much of time on abstract things is what my advice is. I don't spend much time on abstract, because you can learn abstract things as and when you do practice. When you do practice, you learn many stuffs, and that's what abstract is. Probably some 3 lines of statements you might be missing. That's okay. But be more practical. Yeah. Any other question? Okay, so there are no further questions. I guess we can close the call today. Thank you so much for your time. That's something very important, because I planned for 2 weeks, but I've borrowed your time for another one more week. The connect session and today. That happens sometimes because I don't want to close it within the. I think from 6 hours, but it goes beyond that. You would have seen that I don't spend much time on giving more of abstract things, but I focus on abstract. I'm focused on practical things, but the time is not sufficient, so that's why it got extended. But I feel that's okay, because we ensure that we learn things. So thank you so much for your time. So we'll connect up in another session if it's possible, and if you're feasible, if it's okay for you, can connect on the next session. I'll be coming up with the next schedule of plan, and that's direct on Spring Boot. But I'm not sure when it's going to happen. Hopefully it happens soon. Yeah. So
Sir, like Spring documents, can you please provide the download access to this Java 8 course as well?
yeah. I'll do that. Yes, I'll be doing it, of course. Like how I did for Spring. Similarly, the download options will be given at the end, and because I have to do the complete formatting process. So once it is done, it will be accessible for you. 100%. It'll be accessible in a downloaded format. Yeah. Hope you have taken the copy of the earlier Spring, right? So you can take it the same way here.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So thank you, team. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank you.
Karthik. Thanks, Jayanti. Yeah. Thanks. Bye.